Somewhere on this planet, at some specific moment in time, there was a last one. Not the last of a species, the last dinosaur, full stop. A single animal, standing in a real place, on a real morning, breathing real air. And when it died, an empire that had lasted 165 million years ended, quietly, with nobody watching. Nobody knows what it was. Nobody knows where it stood. There is no fossil marked final. But here is what makes this question worth 20 minutes of your life. The answer is not what you think it is. It is not a Tyrannosaurus lying in the ash. It is probably not a large animal at all. And depending on how you define the word dinosaur, the honest answer might be that the last dinosaur has not died yet. There may be one in your neighborhood right now. Let me show you how that can possibly be true. First, we have to demolish something, because almost everyone carries around a mental image that is flatly wrong. You know the image. The asteroid hits. There is a flash. Fire sweeps the world, and in the next frame, the dinosaurs are gone, replaced by fossils and museum lighting and a small mammal blinking in the dawn. It did not work like that. Extinction is not an event. Extinction is a process, and it is a slow, ugly, uneven one. The asteroid did not kill the dinosaurs. The asteroid started the killing, and the killing took time. Think about what actually has to happen for a species to end. Every single individual has to die, or fail to reproduce. That includes the ones in the remote valley, the ones on the island, the ones in the burrow, the lucky one, the sheltered one, the one that happened to be somewhere the fire could not reach. Death on that scale is not instant. It is a grinding process of ecosystems collapsing, food chains snapping, and populations dwindling until the last few animals are simply too scattered to ever find each other again. So the question changes. It stops being, when did the asteroid hit, and becomes something much more interesting. Who was still standing a week later, a month later, a year later? And here is where it gets uncomfortable, because to answer that, we have to admit something about the fossil record. It lies to us, constantly. Let me explain the problem with an uncomfortable thought experiment. Imagine every human on Earth vanished tomorrow. 8 billion people. Now fast forward 66 million years and ask how many of us would be found as fossils. The answer is almost none. Fossilization is absurdly rare. It requires a very specific sequence of accidents. The body has to avoid scavengers. It has to be buried fast, usually by sediment, usually in water. The chemistry has to be right. Then the rock has to survive tens of millions of years of heat, pressure, and erosion without being destroyed. And then, at the end of all that, a human being has to walk across exactly the right patch of ground at exactly the right moment and notice it. The odds against any individual animal becoming a fossil, we find, are astronomical. Which means the fossil record is not a photograph of the past. It is a handful of random pixels from an image with billions of them missing. And this creates a specific, well-known trap in paleontology. If you find no fossils of a species above a certain layer of rock, you might conclude they died out at that point. But absence of fossils is not proof of absence of animals. It might just mean the last survivors were too few, too scattered, or in the wrong kind of environment to leave anything behind. The final population of any dying species is, by definition, tiny, and tiny populations almost never fossilize. So the truth is stark. The very last dinosaurs are precisely the animals least likely to have left us any trace at all, which means we cannot dig up the answer. We have to reason our way to it. So let us do that. let us walk forward through the disaster, hour by hour, and work out who was still alive at each stage. Start with the impact itself. Anything within about 1,000 kilometers of the Yucatan is gone immediately. No survivors, no exceptions, no debate. The shock wave and the heat handle that. But the Earth is enormous. Most dinosaurs on the planet were nowhere near Mexico. What killed them was what came next. Remember the mechanism. The impact blasted molten rock into space, which fell back through the atmosphere across the entire planet. And as it re-entered, it glowed. The sky itself became a heat source. For a period of hours, the surface of the Earth was subjected to intense radiant heat from above. Now pause. Ask the right question here, because this is the fork in the road for every animal alive that day. The question is not, how big are you, or how fierce are you? The question is, can you get out of the sky's line of sight? If you were a large animal standing in the open on a plain, you had no answer. There was nowhere to go and no time to get there. But what if you were in a burrow? What if you were underwater, in a river or a lake? What if you were in a cave, or under a thick overhang, or deep in a swamp, or beneath a dense wet canopy? Then the heat pulse could not reach you. Then you survived hour one. And this is the beginning of the pattern that decides everything that follows. Nothing about the survivors is glamorous. They were not tougher, faster, or smarter. They were sheltered. That is it. That is the whole selection criterion in hour one. So when the sky finally stopped glowing and the survivors crawled out, who was left? Not who you would expect. The world they emerged into was burning. Wildfires had ignited across continents. The air was thick with smoke and ash. And the survivors, blinking in that hellscape, were an unimpressive collection. Small burrowing mammals, freshwater turtles and crocodilians that had been submerged, amphibians in their ponds, insects, seeds and roots waiting underground. And here is the piece almost nobody mentions. Small dinosaurs. There is no rule that says only mammals could hide. Small feathered dinosaurs could also shelter in burrows, root systems, dense cover, and crevices. The physics of hiding does not check your family tree. So on the morning after, there were still dinosaurs alive on this planet. Not many, and not big ones, but they were there, breathing smoke, standing in ash, having survived the single worst day in the history of life. And if you had been there to watch, you might have thought they had a chance. They did not, because the fire was the opening act. The thing that actually ended the dinosaurs was slower, quieter, and completely unstoppable. It was the dark. Here is the part of the story that determines the winners, and it has nothing to do with fire. The impact threw enormous quantities of dust, soot, and sulfur into the upper atmosphere, and it stayed there. Sunlight dropped catastrophically. In many regions, it was too dark for photosynthesis for an extended period. Now think about what that actually means for a food chain. Plants are not just food. Plants are the engine. Every calorie in almost every ecosystem starts as sunlight captured by a plant. Cut off the light, and you have not made life harder. You have unplugged the entire system at the wall. The plants stop growing. Then the herbivores starve, and they starve fast, because a large plant eater needs an enormous continuous supply of vegetation every single day. Then the carnivores that ate the herbivores starve, slightly later, having spent the interval eating the corpses. And here is the brutal logic that decides who survives a food chain collapse. It is not strength, it is not intelligence. It is a single, ruthless question. How little can you live on? If you need 100 kilograms of plant matter a day, you are dead within weeks. If you can live for months on seeds, insects, rotting matter, and scraps, you have a chance. This is why body size became a death sentence. Being big had been the winning strategy for 165 million years. In the space of a few months, it became the reason you died. And this is where a genuinely eerie pattern shows up in the fossil record. Look at what survived across the whole planet. Almost nothing larger than a modern dog made it through on land. There is a size ceiling stamped across the boundary, and it applies to everyone. Mammals, reptiles, dinosaurs, all of them. Something drew a line and said, above this weight, you are finished. So the last dinosaurs were not the mighty ones. Tyrannosaurus was among the first to fall, not the last, precisely because it was magnificent. Its size, its appetite, and its position at the top of the food chain made it maximally fragile. Which brings us to the animals that inherited the empire, and they are, honestly, a little pathetic. Picture the final survivors of the dinosaur dynasty. Not a roaring predator on a cliff, something small, something feathered, probably not much larger than a chicken or a turkey. Something living in dense cover, eating whatever it could find, laying small clutches of eggs, hiding from a sky that had gone permanently gray. That is what the last of the empire looked like. These animals had a few things going for them, and all of them are humble. They were small, so their daily calorie requirement was tiny. They were likely generalists, able to eat seeds, insects, and dead matter, rather than depending on fresh green vegetation. They could shelter, they reproduced quickly relative to giants, and crucially, they could live off the parts of the ecosystem that kept working in the dark. Because here is something people miss about the impact winter. The world was not sterile. It was dark, but the forest floor still had seeds waiting in the soil. It had insects feeding on the enormous quantity of dead plant and animal matter. It had fungi thriving on decay. Freshwater systems, fed by detritus rather than sunlight, held on better than the land and the open ocean. That was the menu: rot, seeds, and bugs. And if you could eat rot, seeds, and bugs, you could keep going. For how long, though? That is where this stops being a story about survival and starts being a story about something sadder. Surviving the disaster is not the same as surviving the aftermath. Here is the trap that closes on the very last populations, and it is one of the cruelest mechanisms in all of biology. Imagine a small group of dinosaurs makes it, 20 animals in a sheltered valley. They lived through the heat, they lived through the dark, and now the sun has come back, and green things are growing again. They are still doomed, and here is why. A population that small is fragile in ways that have nothing to do with the environment. Inbreeding erodes them. Random bad luck, a disease, a bad season, a predator hits them disproportionately hard because there is no buffer. And crucially, they are now competing in an ecosystem being rapidly colonized by mammals and birds that reproduce faster and need less. But the worst part is the isolation. Their species used to span a continent. Now it exists as scattered, disconnected pockets, separated by ruined landscapes they cannot cross. Those pockets wink out one by one, in silence, over years and decades and centuries. And eventually, somewhere, there is one group left, then a handful, then a pair that never meet, then one. Try to hold that image for a second. A single animal in a recovering world with new plants and new competitors, carrying inside it a lineage that stretched back 165 million years. It did not know that. It could not know that. It was just looking for food, the way its ancestors had every day since the Triassic. And when it died, of old age or hunger or an accident or a predator, nothing marked the moment. No fossil, no layer of rock, Just an ordinary death on an ordinary day, and the quiet end of the most successful dynasty of land animals the Earth has ever produced. That is the answer to the question in the title, except it is not, because there is a much stranger answer sitting right next to it, and it changes everything. Everything I have just told you assumes a definition of dinosaur that scientists no longer use, because birds are dinosaurs. That is not a metaphor, a cute framing, or a simplification for children. It is the mainstream scientific position. Birds are theropod dinosaurs, descended from the same group that produced Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus. They did not replace the dinosaurs. They are the surviving branch of the family. Some birds made it through the extinction. We do not know exactly which lineages or exactly why, though the same logic applies. Small, able to shelter, able to eat seeds and insects, and not dependent on lush green growth. Ground-dwelling, seed-eating generalist survivors. Whatever the details, a few of them made it. And from that handful of survivors came every bird alive today. Roughly 10,000 species. Eagles, penguins, hummingbirds, ostriches, ravens, chickens. So the question, what was the last dinosaur, has two legitimate answers, and they are wildly different. If you mean the last non-bird dinosaur, then yes, it was a small, unremarkable animal that died anonymously in the aftermath, and we will never identify it. But if you mean the last dinosaur, period, in the way biologists actually classify life, then the answer is that there has not been one yet. The pigeon outside your window is a dinosaur. The chicken in your fridge is a dinosaur. The empire never ended. It downsized, catastrophically, and then it quietly took over the sky. I find something genuinely comforting in that, and something genuinely unsettling too. The comfort is obvious. The dinosaurs are not a closed story. They are still here, still evolving, still outnumbering us, singing in trees on every continent on the planet. The unsettling part is what their survival actually required. Not strength, not dominance, not being the biggest or the most terrifying animal in the landscape. Every single one of those traits was a liability when the crisis came. The animals that ruled the world for 165 million years were killed by the very qualities that made them rulers. What survived was small, flexible, unfussy, and able to live on almost nothing. So when you picture the last dinosaurs, do not picture a lone tyrannosaur roaring at a burning sky. That image is beautiful and it is wrong. Picture something small and feathered, hiding in the roots of a dead tree, eating a beetle in the dark, with no idea that it is carrying the entire future of its dynasty inside its rib cage. That is what the end of an empire actually looks like. And that is what the beginning of the next one looks like too. If you enjoyed this, subscribe, because we are only getting started. And tell us in the comments, does a bird count as a dinosaur to you? Watch next as we go back to the world these animals lost and reconstruct what Earth was actually like when they ruled it.